Automotive media is in a bad place right now. Tons of creators are leaving companies because they're pissed off. Significant changes have already happened at Donut Media. Hoonigan across town is basically dead, and across the Atlantic, Car Throttle is struggling after most of their people bailed. What's going on? Well, here's some insider info. Earlier this year, I left Donut Media, and I guess everyone is doing why I quit videos. This is kind of mine, but not really. There's a bigger point here. Okay, hang on. That footage was recorded about 3 weeks ago, and I gotta add some additional info right from the get-go. At that time, I already knew about some changes in automotive media that weren't announced until this week. But it's the same thing that's happening everywhere, and that's why I wanted to make this video. Nobody has been completely honest about the problems causing everyone to quit big automotive channels. Even the people who quit don't really tell you the whole story. If you work in this industry, you know what's behind the polite explanations, but if you don't, you might just take them at face value. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Since I'm not like the on-screen personalities from Hoonigan, Motor Trend, or Car Throttle that made quitting videos, I should probably tell you what I've done. Then you can decide whether or not to believe what I'm gonna say. In a little over 3 years with Donut, I worked on about 130 videos. Combined, those have 260 million views. And the channel grew from 4 million to 8 million subscribers while I was there. I was a member of Donut's small creative team. Those are a dozen or so people behind the scenes who decide what videos to create and then make them. That's in addition to the hosts who are all really active behind the scenes too. I did research, writing, supervised other writers' scripts, pitched ideas. Something like half of the videos I worked on were my own ideas. I did field production, worked with private car owners and collectors, and sourced vehicles. I worked with partners like car manufacturers, racetracks, and museums, coordinated press vehicles and event opportunities, and analyzed YouTube data, among other things. I took on a lot of work, and a big reason is because a creative team like Donuts is a tight-knit community. These people end up being your friends. Some of that is down to the shared love of cars, but a bigger fact is because we're all creating something together. I worked hard on every single one of those 130 videos, not because I got paid a lot, I didn't. I worked hard because I knew my friends were relying on me, and I knew they were gonna work just as hard for me. We all shared the same drive to make something that we thought was great. But the reasons I left Donut are affecting an entire industry, the people on screen and behind it. Hundreds of people, not just the ones making why I quit videos. In most of those videos, they pull their punches too, either because they don't want to get sued or they don't want to burn bridges. So I made this video about the problems, and I showed it to a couple of colleagues to get feedback. A few days later, I received a phone call from someone influential in automotive media. It's a relatively small community and word gets around. I was told that multiple people were concerned about what I was planning to say. I didn't think I was pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but I was strongly encouraged to not release this video before other outlets had a chance to make certain announcements. Outlets like those have millions of dollars and the kinds of lawyers that come along with that. So in the interest of self-preservation, I took the advice and delayed this release. That means there are times in this video where I'm dropping hints about stuff that's already happened, but you should know there's more changes coming. Anyway, back to the explanation of what's gone wrong with automotive media. So why did I leave? And why are so many others leaving too? The short answer is money, and that's not about the pay. You kind of expect to be underpaid when you're a creator working for someone else. You're playing with someone else's money, so they hedge their bets a bit. They pay you as little as possible just in case what you create doesn't cover its own costs. The salary wasn't the reason I left, and it likely isn't the reason for anyone else. The problem is where the money is coming from: investors. That's not individual investors, it's venture capital firms and private equity groups. For several years, large investors have been buying up automotive media companies. Most of those media companies were started by small communities of people who were passionate about cars and content creation. That includes entertainment-focused companies like Hoonigan, Car Throttle, and Donut, as well as some more journalistic outlets like The Drive. This trend isn't exclusive to media about cars, but that's the area I know. So these investors buy up media outlets because they're profitable. That's kind of the point of investing, to grow your money. The investors aren't interested in cars, media, or content creation. They just want to own a profitable business, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problems start because the investors want to constantly increase profit margins. Quite a lot, as it turns out. So they implement a bunch of changes hoping to do that. The thing is, most media companies that have achieved long-term success operate with tight profit margins. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the budget. budgets. It's another reason why the creative team doesn't get paid a whole lot. And once investors get involved with big plans for rapid growth, they tend to divert money from those budgets to projects that they think will increase profits, but they're not always right about that. For example, investors like to install their own leadership. These are a bunch of business people, and the investors think those are the right kinds of people to increase revenue. Unfortunately, those people's salaries drastically and immediately increase expenses. When Donut got bought, I went from being 2 steps away from the person at the top to 9 levels down in an organizational chart. All of a sudden, we had all these extra mouths to feed, and it wasn't clear how they were actually contributing to the content, the product the business was built on. All of those managers know their only job is to make more money for the investors. The only way to do that quickly is to immediately cut other costs to offset all those new salaries, including their own. Cost cutting means either layoffs or cutting production budgets, and in many cases, both. So the directive to the creative team ends up being do more with less. Less money and less creative people. In other words, make content that gets more views and generates more revenue without more of the resources that are essential to that. The same business people also funnel resources into courting advertisers instead of content creation. The logic goes something like this. The branded spots that you see in YouTube videos generate revenue, so if we push that, we'll generate even more revenue. The obvious problem is that people aren't watching for the branded spots, they're watching for the creative content. If that suffers, fewer eyes are on the branded spots and revenue declines. Of course, the business types realize that, but instead of giving the creative team the resources it needs to make popular content, they incentivize the creatives. But creatives aren't the sort of people who can be bribed or threatened to work harder. You can't tell us, I will pay you more to have better ideas. We're pretty much creating as hard as we can all the time. Creative people are internally and intrinsically driven to create. We're kind of like those herding dogs that will work themselves to death if you let them. And our goal is already to make the most entertaining and therefore most popular content that we can make. You motivate creatives by giving them the freedom and the resources to make the things that they believe in. But that's another issue. The new managers don't believe in us. I remember fighting against management to get a specific project made. It wasn't even mine. A director had an amazing idea, but it was going to cost more than a typical video. Management didn't want to fund something just because a couple of creatives said this is going to be huge, because honestly, the suits kind of treat us like we're idiots. Even though we've been building an audience for years and we know them and what they like and what kind of content will do numbers, the suits don't want to take risks on ideas because they don't have the experience to differentiate a good idea from a bad one. All they can see is the difference between an expensive idea and a cheap one. Of course, not every idea you come up with is a good one. I certainly made some iffy content, some that I'm even embarrassed about. But even my worst performing videos covered their costs, and that was a big reason why I left. If I made a video that got 1 million views or 5 million views, I got paid the same. And the production costs were covered either way. So my employer's money was never at risk, even when I did my worst work. But all of the reward for those successes went somewhere else. And that wasn't going to the new investors. The creative team's success paid for spiraling expenses, an organization that was getting ever more bloated with managers and leaders hired from the outside, people who didn't take the time to understand what we do or why it was so successful. People who then demand growth without understanding how we grew to where we are in the first place. So they make decisions thinking those will increase growth, which then inhibits it. And they pin the blame on the content instead of listening to the creative teams who've been doing this successfully for years. They then treat creatives like replaceable employees, not essential to the success of the content that built the business. In other words, they think the value is in this abstract thing they call the brand, and not in the creative people and the things that they made. So that's it. Creators like me are tired of paying the salaries of managers and leaders who can't manage and don't lead. We're tired of being told to do more with less than getting blamed when that doesn't magically increase revenue. And we're tired of being dismissed and treated like we don't know what we're doing with something that we built in the first place. I didn't want to work in conditions like that, so I left. So did about half the creative team. And there are more people leaving soon, including on the advice of counsel. I've decided to leave this there. Thanks for watching. I look forward to seeing your comments.